Consciousness returned not to warmth, but to a suffocating, crystalline prison. Every frantic attempt to scream was stifled, the sound dying in his throat, swallowed by the ice. He could feel the cold, a deep, invasive ache that had settled into his very bones. The only sound was the ragged, mechanical rhythm of his own breath echoing through a narrow tube. A sharp, chemical scent, like ozone and sterilized metal, burned in his nostrils. His mind screamed questions into the void, but his body was a statue, a fossil in a glacier of someone's making. This was not an accident of nature. It was a calculated tomb for a living soul. Imprisoned in an icy crypt for 3 endless months, your flesh locked in frost, yet your consciousness shrieking. This is not some distant fiction. This is the harrowing truth of Eli Vance. The cold wasn't just a temperature. It was a tangible, suffocating presence. It carried the scent of ancient stone, damp earth, and the metallic tang of isolation, and the single, plastic drinking straw that became his lifeline to hell. Eli Vance was a man built for the mountains. A geologist from Boulder, Colorado, he lived for the silence of the high places. In October, he set out for a solo, 3-day research trip into the remote St. Elias Range. Just a routine survey. He told his fiancée, Sarah, he'd be back in time to finalize wedding caterers. He was meticulous, experienced, but the mountains have their own ancient rules. On his second day, a freak, localized storm descended. A whiteout so sudden it felt supernatural. It swallowed the basin whole. Eli's last GPS signal vanished at 2:14 p.m. He stumbled, the world dissolving into a roaring white void. A muffled cry was swallowed by the blizzard's fury. Then, only the silent, ceaseless fall of snow remained. Then, the frozen ground beneath him simply dissolved. He tumbled through a shelf of snow into a deep blue crevasse, the camera spinning wildly. The impact came with a sickening thud that jarred his bones. Darkness swallowed him whole, and the air grew thick with the metallic scent of ancient ice. He hadn't fallen far. The impact knocked the wind from him, maybe 20 feet down. He lay dazed in the suffocating dark, lungs burning. Then he heard it, not the wind, something else entirely. Then, a deep, grinding groan echoed through the ice. The crevasse walls, stressed by the storm's heavy snow, began to shift and close. The air grew thick with the scent of crushed ice and ancient, frozen earth. He scrambled upward, but it was like trying to climb a collapsing waterfall. Every handhold gave way. A primal dread took hold as the world squeezed shut around him. The light vanished in moments, plunging him into a suffocating darkness. He was entombed, yet not crushed. The snow had settled around him, forming a fragile, air-pocketed cavity. The cold seeped through his clothing, a damp, clinging chill that felt alive. Every ragged inhale tasted of frost and iron, sharp and metallic in the stillness. A muffled, distant groaning echoed through the frozen layers. The mountains settling, or something else shifting in the depths. The sound vibrated through the packed snow, a low hum against his skin. He held his breath, muscles locked. In that airless tomb, each second stretched into an eternity, measured only by the frantic drumming in his ears. The frozen womb closed in around him. His headlamp flickered to life, its beam revealing walls of compacted blue ice mere inches from his face. The temperature plummeted instantly, a deep cold that seeped through his gear. The air grew heavy and thinned, carrying the faint metallic scent of ancient ice. His hands fumbled through his pack, the stiff fabric of his gloves scraping against the frozen nylon. Every movement felt sluggish, as if the cold itself was a weight. A low, resonant groan echoed through the ice around him, the sound of the glacier shifting under its own immense weight. The walls seemed to press closer. He inventoried his pitiful supplies, a half-full water bottle, 2 protein bars, and the absurdly cheerful blue bendy straw Sarah had mockingly included. "For your summit smoothie," she joked, her voice now a ghost in his memory, its warmth a stark contrast to the creeping chill of the mountain air. The scent of damp stone and his own cold sweat filled his nostrils as he stared at the frivolous object, its plastic sheen catching the weak light. In that moment, the cheerful token felt less like a joke and more like a cruel, final reminder of the world he might never see again. This neon straw, a sliver of garish plastic, became the fulcrum upon which his reality would pivot. Eli's breath began to fog in his headlamp's beam. The vapor clung to the walls, crystallizing instantly into a jagged rime of frost. The first night was a brutal siege of cold. The second brought a silent, desiccating war of thirst. On the third day, his last water vanished, leaving only a desperate, gnawing thirst. He remembered the rule. Eating snow would drop his core temperature, a death sentence. His gaze drifted to the plastic straw in his frozen hands. Then, slowly, he looked up at the sheer, glistening ice wall before him. In a moment of desperate inspiration, Eli pressed the rigid end of his straw against the glacial barrier and exhaled sharply, his warm breath carving a tiny, initial fissure. For agonizing hours he labored, using his own body heat to melt a narrow, icy channel just wide enough for the straw, a glacial IV line. The only sound was the faint, irregular drip of meltwater into the hollow tube, a maddening metronome in the crushing quiet. Each laborious suck would yield a single, bone-chilling drop on his parched tongue, a fleeting victory in a war against the frozen dark. His entire existence became a desperate battle against dehydration. Reality collapsed into the stark circle of his headlamp beam, the metallic taste of millennia-old ice, and the frantic drum of his own heart. Time warped and stretched in the frozen tomb. The only scent was the ozone-clean chill of deep ice, a smell so pure it felt corrosive. His eyes hollowed into deep sockets, and his voice rasped like sandpaper as he whispered to Sarah's photograph. The days dissolved into a featureless haze, marked only by his headlamp's dwindling glow. When the battery finally surrendered, an absolute, suffocating blackness consumed everything. In that void, the air turned thick with the scent of damp stone and stale decay, a blackness so complete it felt heavy, pressing in from all sides. This was when his mind began to fray. The glacier spoke to him. It whispered in the deep, groaning creaks of settling ice. The entity offered warmth in exchange for his last breath. Sarah's voice, a phantom echo from memory, whispered just beyond his ear. The sharp crackle of radio static sliced through the heavy air, a sound out of place in time. Reality itself began to fray, the threads of memory, dream, and the present moment dissolving into one indistinguishable haze. A sudden, terrifying crack echoed in the chamber. A fracture spider-webbed across the frozen surface, branching out like lightning frozen in time. The cavity containing Eli visibly shrank by an inch, the ice groaning as it compressed inward. His tomb was actively constricting, the very mountain swallowing him whole. The pressure became constant, unyielding, pressing in from all sides. His arms could no longer fully extend, trapped in a shrinking pocket of frigid air. The straw channel, his only lifeline, began to close, the plastic collapsing inward with each labored breath. He had to constantly remelt it with his own body heat, his lips now cracked and bleeding, fused to the plastic by frozen saliva. His body was consuming itself, a skeleton wrapped in frozen leather, sustained only by a thread of will and a trickle of million-year-old water. Eli's eyes, wide and unblinking in the dark, strained to perceive the faintest movement. The air was thick with the scent of ozone and ancient, damp stone. Every nerve was taut, his breath held, listening for what might be listening back. His hallucinations sharpened into piercing clarity. A roadside diner materialized. The aroma of stale coffee filled his nostrils. A crackling jukebox hummed in the background. He attempted to order water, his voice a dry rasp against the phantom counter. On what his fractured psyche marked as day 100, the auditory landscape shifted. The familiar, crystalline crackle of ice gave way to a new, alien resonance. Not the brittle snap of freezing water, but a low, grinding reverberation. It was a sound of dense, resonant metal, a vibration that seeped into the marrow of his bones. A distant, rhythmic chunk-chunk-chunk echoed through the glacial chamber. Was it a drill biting into ancient ice, or just another cruel auditory illusion from the shifting glacier? His throat was raw and useless. No voice remained to cry out or question the source. The metallic scent of ozone now mixed with the deeper, organic smell of something long buried. All he could do was breathe. He placed the straw in his mouth, the same hollow ritual that had sustained him through 100 sunless days, and waited. Then, a metallic shriek tore through the ice, and a drill bit erupted into the cavity, missing his face by inches. True daylight, raw and blinding, flooded the chamber for the first time in months. Eli remained motionless, his gaze vacant and uncomprehending. The rescue team had traced a downstream ice melt anomaly via satellite, expecting to recover a corpse. Instead, they witnessed the impossible. The body's head slowly turned toward them. Its eyelids fractured open like frozen parchment, and it looked directly at them. The bright blue straw, still clamped between its lips, stood out against the sterile white of the hospital room. Eli, now emaciated and swaddled in heated blankets, stared vacantly out the rain-streaked window. A low, ozone-like hum from the medical equipment filled the quiet, broken only by the rasp of his own breath. His hands, resting on the stiff sheets, trembled with a faint, ceaseless tremor. Sarah clutched the photograph, tears tracing lines down her pale cheeks. Eli Vance had physically returned from the ice, but the man she remembered remained partially entombed. He suffered from a profound Stockholm syndrome with his own frozen prison. Night terrors would seize him. He'd wake screaming, his voice raw, pleading not to have his air tube removed. Doctors called it a miracle. His therapist called it the most profound case of survival trauma they'd ever seen. Eli sat in the quiet room, the air thick with the scent of old books and ozone. Every muscle in his body remained rigid, as if still braced for impact. A damp chill clung to his skin, though the room was warm. His breath pitched as a faint, rhythmic scratching sound echoed from the hallway. It wasn't the silence that terrified him now, but the whispers it concealed. He cradled the glass of water, his eyes fixed on its surface. From the table, he lifted a single straw, rolling it between his fingers with slow, deliberate motions. His gaze drifted into the middle distance, as if seeing something far beyond the room. The narrator's voice dropped to a near whisper. He survived on a straw, but the price was a fragment of his sanity. The cold didn't just preserve his body. It petrified 100 days of pure, unbroken dread. The air carried the scent of ozone and ancient rot, and every surface felt like frozen stone. So here's the question that gnaws at me. the one that should unsettle you. Was he saved, or was he simply unearthed? The final image sears itself into memory. A single, brilliant blue straw, abandoned on an endless white expanse. The stark contrast feels deliberate, a cryptic symbol left in a void. Then, the world begins to dissolve. The last coherent shape, that lone, impossible blue, fades into obscurity as the screen surrenders to black.